Hello and welcome to another episode of Facts, Values, and Flourishing. I'm Craig Biddle. Today we're going to talk about moral values as both absolute and conditional. Now, to many people's minds, this may sound like a contradiction. How could the values be both absolute and conditional? But what we're going to see is that it's not a contradiction. It's actually an integration. It's a really important integration that helps to get our heads further around this idea of a completely secular, objective moral code, a fact-based, reason-based, absolute moral code. But before we dive into the particulars, I want to give a quick recap of what we've covered, at least in terms of some essentials that are going to be really important for getting off the ground today. So we've already seen that life is the standard of value, and that this is true for all living things, whether trees or tigers or plants, animals, whatever. And it's true of people. Human life is the standard of value for people, so it's the standard of moral value when we get to the level of chosen values. The way that we can determine which values are the right ones to choose is by determining which values support human life and which values don't. So a value is that which you act to gain or keep, but we can act to gain or keep things that are not conducive to our life, or that don't support or advance our life, and that actually are detrimental to our life. Those would be wrong values by this standard. They would be factually wrong values. And the values that are correct, the values that are morally correct, are those that actually advance our lives. So we have this black and white context here for what values are. And for each individual, our own life is our ultimate goal. It's our ultimate value. It's the thing that we should strive to make as wonderful as we can, not only to remain alive, but to flourish, to live as the kind of animal we are, a rational being with an emotional faculty and all of the needs, both spiritual and material, that come with that. We want to live that kind of a life. And of course, it's not for a moment or a day, but for many years and decades. So that's what we're trying to do, and the standard is the requirements of our life as the kind of animal that we are. So how is it that we can determine what exactly the values are that we need? Well, clearly, there are factual requirements of our life, right? We need food, we need shelter, we need medicine, we need spiritual values, we need things like self-esteem and purpose, and those aren't quite as obvious as the food and shelter are, but we're going to cover those kinds of things today. But I want to begin by anchoring the absolutism of values, so the fact that moral values are absolute, and then after that we'll talk about how it is that they are also conditional. So we can see that if we don't have food, we'll die. If we don't have shelter, if we're out in the freezing cold or in the scorching heat, or if the predators can get at us and kill us, we're going to die, or we're going to live short, brutish lives. So it's quite clear that there are factual requirements of human life. Now the question is, how do we get these requirements? How do we get food, shelter, medicine, and on up to spiritual values and freedom, political values? We need that in order to live. How do we get these things? Well, we have to take certain actions, right? We have to act to gain the food. We have to either hunt animals or pick berries or grow crops. These are all verbs, right? We're acting. We have to do the same to build a shelter. I mean, unless you're just wandering into a cave, just to build a mud hut, you've got to take action. And we have to do the same for all of the other values. We have to act to gain or keep self-esteem and purpose, and we'll talk about those more abstract and spiritual values later. And we have to act to gain and keep freedom, right? So all of these things are values that we have to act to gain and keep. And the question then becomes, how do we know, A, which values we need in order to live? We were not born with this knowledge. We're not even born knowing we need food. Certainly not born knowing we need shelter or spiritual values or freedom. How do we know that we need these things, A? And B, how do we get them? What do we have to do to take these actions? And then how do we know which actions to take? So there's a bunch of hows and whys here that we've got to get clear on. But it's clear as day that there are factual requirements of human life. So since we know we have to get food, clothing, shelter, etc., And since we know we have to take certain actions to get them, the big question is, how do we know which actions and how do we know which values? Well, what's our means of gaining knowledge? What is the faculty that we have that enables us to figure out what it is we need and what actions we need to take to gain and keep those things? Well, clearly it's reason. It's our rational faculty. It's our ability to observe reality, to integrate our observations into concepts and generalizations and principles, and to then act on that knowledge to gain and keep the values we need. And we can see this throughout our entire lives and all of history. I mean, how did people come to build the first shelters? Well, they looked at reality and they figured that if you take this stick and put it together and you pack more sticks around those and you pack mud and leaves around that, right, you start to see. So they're using their rational faculty in that process. They're thinking, they're using reason. The same is true in determining how to catch animals to eat. How does somebody set a trap to try to catch a rabbit? Or how does somebody shape a spear or fashion a hook in order to catch running animals or fish, right? It's our rational faculty that enables us to do this. We have to observe reality, integrate our observations into concepts and ideas, integrate those into generalizations and then even principles. So then we arrive at things like man needs freedom in order to live as a human being. So there's everything from the most obvious values like food, clothing, shelter, through fairly sophisticated spiritual values like self-esteem and purpose and romantic love, and then political values like freedom and rule of law. And all of these things require certain actions. All of these things are identified as values by means of our rational faculty. And how it is that we can gain and keep these things is identified by means of our rational faculty. So what we can see here is that reason, our reasoning mind, is our most fundamental value. It's the value on which all other values depend, or it's the value that gives rise to all other values. Now, it may sound like it's competing for life for the ultimate value. Now, life is the ultimate value in the sense that that's the ultimate goal. Reason is a means. It's also something that we seek to gain or keep in and of itself. If you think about it, we seek reasons for things. Why did that happen? Why did the animal get away when I set the trap this way? And oh, if I set it this way, then I can see that it'll work. So the reasons are both a means to an end, and it's something that we're looking for is reason. So you can see that in both dimensions there. So reason is something that we act to gain and keep, and it's also a tool that we use to gain and keep the things that we need for life in general. And it's our most basic value. And this is the point that Ayn Rand emphasized more than any other in her philosophy of objectivism, that man survives by means of reason, by means of his fundamental means of knowledge, his only means of knowledge: observation, integration, and logic. So we can see by looking at reality, by looking at history, by looking at the sciences, look at agriculture, look at chemistry, look at physics, look at engineering, look at art. How do artists make art? How did Shakespeare write his plays? He sat down and he thought and he reflected and he created ideas and characters and stories in his mind. And that's a process of thinking. So reason is our basic means of living. And this is an objective fact. This is just a fact. It's an absolute. And it's clear as day that it's an absolute. At least it's clear as day if we reflect and think about the various areas of life. So there's one absolute requirement of human life, and it's the most fundamental. Now, another thing that we need is meaning and purpose. And people talk about these things as if they're the same thing, and they kind of are in a sense. And the reason that people are constantly talking about what's the purpose of life and how can I make my life more meaningful and asking these kinds of questions is because we really do need meaning and purpose. It's not just a myth that we need these things. We need them. Why? What's going on here? Well, what are these things? What is meaning and what is purpose? Well, a purpose is an intentional goal. It's something you go after intentionally. So purposes are unique to human beings because they entail free will. We make a decision. I'm going to go after this thing. I want to pursue this career. I want to pursue this girl or guy. I want to engage in this activity, this hobby, this recreational activity, this leisure activity. I need some sleep. I'm going to go lay down, right? So purposes are intentional goals, and we need them in order to live. We have to set goals in order to achieve goals. So it's quite clear that we need purposes in life. We have to choose goals, and then we have to pursue those goals so that we can achieve the goals that will therefore serve our lives. Now, meaning is very related to this because we gain a sense of meaning, a sense that life matters, precisely by going after goals that matter to our lives, right? It's no coincidence that the two words meaning and means have the same root. Your meaning is informed by the means to ends. So if we have ends, we have goals that we want to achieve, what makes life meaningful is going after those goals. What is the means to achieve this end? That's all infused with the idea of meaning and purpose and the aspects of human life that make life matter. If life didn't matter, if you were just alive and sitting someplace and somebody was feeding you, twice a day and pouring water into your mouth, you would not regard that as a human life, right? And there's a reason, because there would be no meaning in the life. Your heart might continue to beat, your eyes might blink on occasion, but there would be no meaning in your life. Why? Because there are no purposes in your life. There's no activity toward goals that fill your life with spiritual meaning and that give you a sense of self-ownership and of efficacy in the world. So we really do need meaning and purpose, and the way that we achieve meaning and purpose is by means of our chosen goals, by the projects, the engagements, the long-term aims that we set for ourselves. So the kinds of things that give life meaning, I've already named, but I'll rename. So things like your career, romantic relationships, friendships, fabulous conversations with people, maybe even strangers on occasion. You have a great conversation with somebody and you walk away and you're like, wow, that was really meaningful. That really added value to my life. Okay? So meaning and purpose are intimately related. We're not born with prepackaged purpose or ready-made meaning. We don't come out with, oh, I know what I need to do now, or I know what I should do now, right? These are things that we have to develop on our own over time. And proper meanings, proper aims for human beings are life-serving aims. So granted, somebody can say, well, my meaning and purpose in life is to go rob banks or rape, pillage, and plunder. Now, somebody can say that and somebody can pursue those values, but they're not values that are suitable to a human being given the requirements of human life. So not the least of which is that they violate other rights, but they also aren't proper for the person who's doing it, because you cannot live as an integrated material and spiritual being if you are raping, pillaging, and plundering, if you're abusing the people who are in your same species, who could be people who you'd be in good relationships with and be producing and trading with and gaining all sorts of material and spiritual value from. And instead, if you're out there hacking them up and stealing their stuff, this is not a life. So there's negative meaning. You can speak of negative meaning for people who have anti-life goals and aims. But proper meaning, meaning for human beings who want to live as human beings, are simply the goals and long-term projects that we choose and set for ourselves. And they're absolutely essential to a life of happiness. So purpose and meaning, but primarily purpose, because purpose is your means to meaning. Purpose is another absolute value of human life. We can't live properly if we don't set goals, and set goals not only for short-term and material things like food and clothing, but also for longer-term things like a career and a full life and a romantic relationship and recreational pursuits and things along these lines that fill our lives with meaning and joy. So we have two values now that are absolutes. We have reason and purpose. And we can see that these are values by looking at reality, integrating our observations into generalizations and principles, and then we arrive at these ideas. Reason is our most fundamental value because it's our means of knowledge and our basic means of living. Purpose is another crucial value because if we don't have goals and aims, we can't live and enjoy life in a way that we would if we were just strapped to a tree and being fed. So we can see clear as day that these are absolutes. The third absolute that I want to touch on is self-esteem. We can't very well live and pursue our values with much efficacy if we think that we are incapable of doing anything. So if we don't have self-confidence, if we don't have confidence that we're capable of dealing with the world, and we can't live very well if we think that we're rotten, if we don't think we're worthy of success in this world. And so these are the two components of self-esteem. You've got self-efficacy or self-confidence. I'm able to do these things. I'm able to think and act in the world in a way so that I can achieve the values I need to live and be happy. And I'm worthy of achieving these goals because I'm a good person, because I am somebody who thinks and acts rationally and respects other people's rights to do the same. So self-esteem, which is this integration of self-confidence and self-respect, self-esteem is a crucial human value, and it's essential to a life of happiness. And this is an absolute. And we can see this in our own lives, we can see it in the lives of other people, and we can see it in historical figures. You think of the people who have really been great success. Do they have high self-esteem? Yes, they do. Where did they get it? It brings us back to reason and purpose, because this third absolute value, self-esteem, is gained by means of rational, purposeful action, right? That's how you get self-esteem. We're not born with self-esteem. We don't come out of the womb going, I'm great and I'm efficacious and I deserve everything I can go after and achieve, right? That does not come with us when we're born. We earn self-esteem by using our minds, setting rational goals, pursuing those goals, achieving those goals, not all of them, but achieving goals substantially. And then in the aggregate, we are able to see and integrate that, I'm efficacious. I can take action in this world and achieve things, and I'm good at this, and I get better at it over time. And we sort of observe and introspect that this is what we're doing, and that's how we gain self-confidence. And by acting in ways that we regard as good, by not acting against principles that we hold to be true, so if you regard honesty and integrity and justice as good things, and then you act against them, you're going to feel rotten. You're going to feel unworthy of achievement, of success and happiness. But if you hold those things as a value and you uphold them in action, then you're going to feel great about yourself, and you feel like, I'm worthy of success. So we have these three absolute values: reason, purpose, and self-esteem. And Ayn Rand called these the cardinal values of human life. And they're for the very reasons that we just saw. They're the fundamental values. These three values together constitute really the base of the values that human beings need in order to live. We need lots of other things, but the way we get those other things is through reason and purpose and self-esteem. So you see there's a fundamentality to these. Now, how is it that these absolutes are also conditional? What does conditional mean? It means that on the condition that you want such and such, then these things are going to be a value, right? That's sort of what conditional means, or at least that's what it means in this context. Well, here's the thing about reason, purpose, and self-esteem. You do not have to go by reason. You do not have to choose and pursue purposes, and you do not have to gain and keep self-esteem. You just don't have to. You can do without these things. But if you do without these things, if you don't embrace reason and use it, if you don't pursue purposes, and if you don't earn self-esteem, you suffer the consequences of not using and pursuing these values, right? So you don't have to. There's nothing in the fabric of the universe that says you have to do this. And the only thing that happens if you don't use or uphold these values is you suffer the consequences of not doing it, right? And this is because we live in a causal universe. We live in a universe whereby actions have consequences, and decisions have consequences. And if you choose to use reason, then you get one result. If you choose not to use reason, you get another. If you choose to act purposefully, you get one result. If you choose not to do so, you get another. So there's a beautiful story, very brief, that Ayn Rand tells in one of her essays, Causality versus Duty. And it's a story, she says there's this old black woman, and a man is telling her that she's got to do this and she's got to do that. And the black woman looks up at the man and she says, "Mister, there's nothing I've got to do except die." And if you think about it, it's true. There's nothing any of us have to do except die, right? You can say, well, you have to go and get a job. No, I don't. I can just sit here. You have to use your mind and think. Nope, I don't. I can just sit here and do nothing. I can turn my mind off if I want to. Well, that's true. But then you suffer the consequences of turning your mind off. Then you suffer the consequences of not pursuing goals and values, right? So the absolutism of these values is clear as day because we know we're trying to achieve a goal. There's a causal connection here. There's the goal, the end, and then there's the means, the actions and the thinking and the purposes, right? And so all of that makes perfect sense as absolutes, but it's also conditional. It's all conditioned on the idea that you want to live and achieve happiness. But you don't have to live and achieve happiness. You can stop acting altogether, anyone can, at any moment, and you can just wither away and die. So it's moral values, objective moral values anchored in the principle that life is the standard, are both absolute and they are conditional. And another way to think about this, and I think this is a really good a good way to segue into sort of a more philosophic perspective on this, but it'll be helpful, is that values are hypothetical, not categorical, okay? These values pertain to hypothetical imperatives, not categorical imperatives, right? A hypothetical imperative is, if you want to achieve X, then you must do Y, Z, Q, whatever, right? It has to do with a causal relationship. If you want to have a wonderful career, then you must do the thinking necessary. You must choose a career. You must commit yourself to taking the actions necessary to pursue that career. You must be honest about the facts. You must be rational. You must treat people justly. There's all sorts of things that you must do if you want to achieve that end. And these are causal connections, right? If you want to achieve an end, you must enact the means to achieve that end. So that's the idea of a hypothetical imperative. It's imperative if you want this thing. A categorical imperative is the idea, and this is what the philosopher Immanuel Kant is famous for advocating. A categorical imperative is the idea that you must do something regardless of what you want, regardless of whether it has any positive impact on your life, regardless of your interests. A categorical imperative is a must without an if, right? Hypothetical imperative is that you must if. The categorical imperative is you must under all circumstances. It's a categorical must. You simply must. So you must always tell the truth. So even if the robber comes to the house and wants to know, he puts a gun to your head, he gets your wallet out, and then he says, do you have any more money in the house? Is there a safe? And you have a safe in the back room. Then Immanuel Kant would say, well, you have to tell him the truth. It's categorical imperative. Thou must always tell the truth, right? Well, that doesn't make any sense. There's something wrong with that idea. You can tell right there, and it's more clearly wrong if you put people's lives at stake. So it's not just somebody looking for money. Let's say a beast comes to the door, and he's trying to find children to molest or to murder, and he wants to know if there are children in the house, or he wants to know if there are Jews in the attic, or whatever, right? And the idea behind a categorical imperative would be, if thou shalt never tell a lie, that if somebody asks, are there people in the house, you would have to say, well, yes. Or, at the very least, I'm not comfortable answering that question, right? It's ridiculous. But this is the difference between a hypothetical imperative and a categorical imperative. And the fact that Ayn Rand points out is that there are no categorical imperatives, except you have to die. That's it. That's the beauty of that story about the old black woman. Mister, there's nothing I've got to do except die. So there's really only one categorical imperative, and it's that. All of the other imperatives are if-then. They're all hypothetical imperatives, and this does not mean that morality is subjective, because we've just seen that if life is the standard of value, there are absolute facts there are absolute values that you must pursue and achieve in order to live. So you can see here that moral values are both absolute and conditional. There's another beautiful way to think about this, and I'm going to draw one more time from Ayn Rand, and this is also from her essay Causality versus Duty, which I highly recommend that you read. It's in her book Philosophy, Who Needs It? This is where she compares her morality, rational egoism, with Immanuel Kant's morality, the idea that there are moral duties. So that's why it's called causality versus duty. Ayn Rand's ideas are, look, we live in a causal environment. If you want certain ends, then you have to enact the means to achieve those ends. And Immanuel Kant is saying, thou shalt do this, you must do this. There are no ifs. There is no what's good for your life or what's good for your interest. It's just must, right? And those are duties. A duty is an unchosen obligation, whereas a real value is a chosen obligation. I've chosen this thing, and therefore I have to take these actions to achieve it. But a beautiful way that Rand puts this in Causality versus Duty is she points out that there are two different kinds of people involved in these ideas. So there's a disciple of causation. A disciple of causation is someone who looks at the world and sees that, hey, this is a causal environment, and if I want to achieve the values that will make my life great, then I've got to think and plan and take the kinds of actions that are going to do that, right? Because of the causal connections, the causal nature of the environment. So that's a disciple of causation. And then she speaks about the disciple of duty. And a disciple of duty thinks to himself, well, there are just things I must do. Why? Well, what do you mean why? They're categorical imperatives. They're things that you just must do. I must sacrifice for others. Where'd you get that idea? Why? Well, don't ask that. It's a categorical imperative. It's just something that I just must do. And this is a complete disconnect from reality, because there are no categorical imperatives in reality. There's nothing in reality that says you must do anything except die. Morality is the realm of choice. And the idea of categorical imperatives kicks choice out of morality. It says you don't get to make choices. You just have to do these things. So you can see how beautiful Ayn Rand's ethics is, how beautiful this idea of rational egoism, of people pursuing their values and respecting the rights of others to pursue their values, people looking at the causal environment in which we live, using reason to make causal connections, and then to take actions to achieve the values that we need, and then to trade them with other people and the like. You can see all of that makes very much sense, and it's all anchored in observation and logic. Whereas the idea that there are musts that you must just do without any reason, without any impact, positive impact on your lives, this is the traditional Kantian and largely Christian idea. It's the idea that sacrifice is good because it's sacrifice. Jesus, the image of Jesus on the cross is all about sacrifice is good. Why? Well, look, the most moral man ever, Jesus, sacrificed for your sins. I mean, what could be greater than that, right? Is the idea. Now, you're not great enough to sacrifice like that. You're not Jesus. Few people get close to that. And Mother Teresa, sort of sacrificed a lot, but she wasn't even Jesus, right? Because she didn't sacrifice fully. So this idea that sacrifice or giving up your values, and this is what this ultimately in Kant's philosophy is what the categorical imperative is all about. It's about acting in ways that are contrary to the requirements of your life, because that's the only way that you can know that your decisions and choices are not sullied by self-interest. And that whole idea is just completely corrupt if you have as your baseline observation, logic, and the requirements of human life. So I hope you're starting to see the beauty and depth and breadth of these ideas and how important they are, and how much sense this objective and secular morality that Ayn Rand has devised is. it just makes sense, and it's going to continue making even more and more sense as we move forward and talk in our next episode of Facts, Values, and Flourishing. We'll talk about the virtues. Values are objects of action, so values are things we act to gain or keep. And moral values, morally correct values, are things that we act to gain or keep that are actually in service of our life. So then the next big question is, what actions, fundamentally speaking, does that imply, given again the kind of animal that we are and the ultimate goal that we're trying to achieve, a life full of happiness, a life of flourishing. Hope you're enjoying the series so far. If you are, please share it with your friends, let them know about it, and we'll be skipping next week, by the way. So TOSCon, our Philosophy for Freedom and Flourishing conference, is in Richmond, Virginia, beginning next Thursday. So I will not be doing one of these episodes next week. We'll resume the following week, and that's when we'll pick up on the virtues, which are principled, life-serving actions. So look forward to seeing you then, and until then, love your life.